Okay, well, welcome everyone. My name is Isabel Jeniches. I'm with the Healthy Soil Working Group, and I'm so glad to see you all here for a first ever fireside chat, virtual fireside chat, that is. We ask that you put your audio on mute until you're prompted by a facilitator. We have Rachel Ryan of Backyard Farms here with us today, and she will give a little intro to biochar. And during that, you can type your questions in the chat, and we might call on you to unmute. And if you want to have your video recorded, you can leave that on or off, up to you. But so we have a little bit of a conversation going. That is what we're planning to do today for like about half an hour. If we're going a little over, that's okay. But we'll just see how it's going. So I'm very pleased to introduce Rachel Ryan. She's the owner of Backyard Farms in Vado, which is south of Las Cruces. And really, this farm is one of the most innovative and community-minded endeavors that I know. She just received a grant to develop freeze-drying equipment to create a nutritious and delicious healthy food product that can reach vulnerable food insecure populations without the need for refrigeration. She also works with Las Cruces high school students to develop business models for vermicomposting, and she teaches workshops on every aspect of urban gardening and regenerative agriculture in a desert climate. So one of the topics that she's super knowledgeable about is biochar. Rachel is actually a licensed biochar producer, and I'm so grateful that she's here with us today to share some of that knowledge to prepare us for tomorrow's field day on low-tech methods to make biochar. So thank you so much, Rachel, for being here with us, and take it away.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. And I do want to apologize to everyone. We're having some internet issues, so I can't have the video. I'm on audio right now. So the others in the group will have to, if you ask a question or something, to let me know. But yes, I run Backyard Farms, and we do a lot of urban farming. And of course, in New Mexico, our soil tends to need a lot of soil amendments. So we've gotten into biochar, and working with NMSU, I've worked with some professors in the engineering department, particularly Catherine Brewer, who does a lot with biochar work at the university. And so we've done a lot of experimental work and writing grants and programs to develop different types of biochar and biocoal projects. So that's kind of what got me into that. And then our farm became licensed from the New Mexico Department of Agriculture to be able to sell our biochar. I'm happy and sad to say that we just can't make enough of it to really do huge sales. We pretty much use most all the biochar we make for our own grow operations. And so one of the things I love about biochar is that it doesn't take any expensive equipment or extensive PhD type knowledge. It's a pretty easy process, and it's something that human beings have actually been doing for thousands of years. There's some really interesting work coming out of Cornell University who studied terra preta soil. And this is an amazing soil that comes from the Amazon that's completely man-made. And one of the most important ingredients in it is biochar. And so people would add that in, and what it did was create this microbial community that can self-regenerate the soil itself with nutrition and so forth, that these microbes can produce phosphates and sequester nitrogens and things like that. So it's a pretty amazing soil, and that's kind of what opened the doors to a lot of the biochar work that's going on right now, that realizing that this is something we can do to amend our soil in the same way that our ancestors did at one time, all the time. And here in New Mexico, biochar is definitely part of our natural ecology. So before a lot of the Europeans came in and altered a lot of the ecology in the region, we used to have, this would be wildfire season, the windy season, wildfire season, and wildfires would kind of sweep through the region and deposit small layers of biochar on the soil. And then come monsoon season, it would work those biochar into the soil. And that would promote a lot of the growth of different plants and things in our region. But because we've allowed things to overgrow too much and wildfires get out of control, we've had to suppress wildfires. So we've kind of broken up this natural cycle that was normally taking place here in the Southwest. So we have to kind of mimic it in our own way in a controlled manner by making our own biochar and then depositing that on our soils to promote our own growing. So biochar is made using a process called pyrolysis. And this uses extremely high temperatures in the presence of low oxygen. And it chars basically any type of biomass. So it could be yard waste material, excess plant material, weeds you can biochar. We did a project with tumbleweeds. We were using them to make a biochar. You can use woods to make biochar. You can use almost anything. There's a couple of things in our area that you want to stay away from that might release noxious gases and things like that that you wouldn't want to include or inhale. You wouldn't want to have things like plastics in there or other sorts of substances like that, that again could cause toxicity, either in your little biochar when you add it to your garden or while you're making it. So we need to be a little careful with that. But using your typical yard waste and so forth, basically you make a fire almost like a bonfire, but as the fire starts to build up, you smother it with another layer. And by smothering it, that's how you can cut off the oxygen and allow the pyrolysis process to really take place. And so every time it flames up, you smother it down with more and more biomass. And at the very end, then you can stop the process entirely by dousing your fire with water. And that will make sure it's thoroughly soaked and stop it when it's at that black phase. So when it looks like charcoal, that black, that's when you want to stop it. You don't want it to burn till it turns to the white powder ash, because then you've lost all the properties that you need. Excuse me. The properties of biochar that make it so attractive is that once it's a carbon that then has, through that process, it creates many pores throughout the material. And these pores, when it rains, will soak up the water like a wick and hold on to that water. And then as the soil around it starts to dry out, it can wick that water right back out into the soil. And so in that respect, it allows it to take one watering event, like one rainfall, and actually stretch it out numerous days to continue to water your garden or your field. It also can absorb water very quickly in a very short amount of time, which when we get these monsoon rainstorms that just kind of douse a ton of water, those cloud bursts that we get, you tend to get a lot of runoff. But when you have the biochar, it can absorb that very quickly and then prevent runoff. So it has those two physical benefits to your garden. Biochar doesn't provide any nutrition to your garden per se, but it does create this environment that then the microbes, the beneficial microbes, that hopefully you're all composting and adding some of that to your garden. And those wonderful soil microbes, they thrive in that type of environment. And that's kind of how biochar actually helps the process, helps soil health. In that regard, is creating that wonderful environment for the microbes. It can also be used too as a filtration system. So if you put layers of biochar, for instance, by roadsides when we get a rainfall, it can actually, the water as it rushes through the biochar will actually act as a filter. If you think of your fish tank, most fish tank filters use charcoal filters because it does a really nice job of filtration. I've also heard of some other farmers using biochar to filter some of the river water that they get before they irrigate their fields, because often there's a lot of nasty stuff floating around in the river. And it's one way to help clean that water before it enters into your field to reduce some of the contaminants and so forth. So biochar is the thing that most gardeners want to use. The difference between biochar and biocoal, I often get a lot of questions about that. Biocoal is made using a different technique called torrefication, which is at a slightly lower temperature than pyrolyzation. But it also is in the absence of oxygen. And so those conditions are really difficult to replicate in a home environment, to keep it at that low temperature without it going too high. So usually that's done somewhere in a controlled environment in a laboratory, or there's different units you can buy. I know in Australia, they actually had one where you could adjust it to the temperatures of torrefication if you needed, or to pyrolyzation if you needed. to create either biocoal or the biochar. The biocoal has a lot more of the carbon in it, so it doesn't turn to the black the way that pyrrolization does. I often explain it to people that it's kind of like coffee. You have your medium roast and your dark roast. So your pyrrolization is your dark roast and your torrefication is that medium roast. And that medium roast allows it to retain more of the carbon. And you can then use that material to heat for combustion for either heat creation or for energy generation. So there's people who will use that biocoal to heat homes or buildings or businesses, or you could use it. The project we were working on with Dr. Brewer was to use biocoal that was produced from tumbleweeds to replace fossil coal, because the fossil coal in our region has high levels of mercury in it that exceed EPA levels. We were proposing that if we could substitute some of that fossil coal with biocoal, and we could help get rid of some of the tumbleweeds, as well as helping the environment a little bit more with energy being produced from a renewable source. So it doesn't have those same pores the way that the biochar does. So it's not as attractive for use in garden to amend the soil. So those are kind of the two big differences between biochar and biocoal. And I'm going to open it up for any questions at the moment before I steamroll ahead.
Yeah, there's one question in the chat. It says, this is by Andrew Swap. Are there good, better, and best materials to use? Are hardwoods better to use than softwoods? Is biochar like a parking garage for good bacteria, etc.?
So the first part of it, you can use just about anything. I don't know that there's that it produces any better physical properties between a hardwood or a softwood. It's just in terms of how long it takes to keep it in the fire for. Obviously, hardwoods will take a little bit longer to go through the pyrrolization process than something like, yard clippings and grass clippings and tumbleweeds and things like that. So it might just be, what is your time allotment set aside to make biochar? And then what was the second half of the question?
The second half of the question is if it's like a parking garage for good bacteria and so forth.
Yeah, in a way. I mean, it creates that environment that nurtures a lot of those microbes, the things that help to sequester some of the nitrogens and nitrogen fixed from the air in the soil that you usually want around the roots of your plants and things. It helps to keep that environment. So it reduces some of the toxicity in the soil by keeping it clean, and then also keeping that constant moisture level. Because if those bacteria dry out, then some of them die or some of them just go dormant. And either way, they're not producing what you need them to for your plants.
Thank you. Yeah, and Scott Bennett, if you want to unmute yourself.
There we are. I'm just wondering how biochar is different from charcoal, basically.
It's pretty much the same. The commercial charcoals that you get are usually impregnated with different chemicals, to help with lighting it and keeping it going, or adding scents. People add scents to it to give a charcoal with a hickory smoke or something like that. So it's just the pure form, the pure raw is biochar.
Thanks.
Thank you. And Francine, if you want to unmute yourself.
Hi. Yeah, I'm sorry. My internet went out. I don't know if you'd already addressed this or not, but I was wondering if are there like safe practices for creating biochar? I mean, I caught something about how it's really high temperature and maybe it's not possible to create it yourself. I'm sorry if I missed that, and I could listen to the recording if it's repeating it. Thanks.
Oh, well, the biochar part, the pyrrolization, is pretty easy to do at home if you're doing a bonfire. It's the torrefication part, that slightly lower temperature, that's a little harder to do without a controlled environment. So making the bio-coal is a little harder than making biochar. But the biochar is something, yeah, as long as you keep a good hot fire going, it's pretty easy to do.
Okay, thank you. And I was just wondering if, with the fire danger that we have, not at the moment, but frequently, just any suggestions about a containment system or whatever for a fire like that. Thanks.
Yeah, so some of the safety practices, definitely make sure it's not on a windy day that you're going to be doing any biochar production. Judge your area and the distance between where you want to do your fire and to a shed or a tree or something like that, and determine how large you want your fire to get. If you have things close by, then make sure you don't have a huge bonfire, just a small controlled fire. Some people can do them and have done them in barrels and things, metal barrels to protect it. We just traditionally do have a little rock circle around, almost like a campfire, and do it just kind of campfire style. It's how we do it on our farm. In certain jurisdictions and things, you may have to alert your fire department or so forth to see if it's okay to burn on certain days in certain locations. So definitely check with the ordinances in your area, what they are regarding open fires. Some down here in Doña Ana, they post whether it's a green or a red light day, whether you can open burn or not, to kind of give farmers a heads up. And again, if you're in a city or in an urban environment, you might want to let your local fire department know, so that nobody gets scared and calls the fire department on you. We've often just given a little heads up that we're going to be doing biochar this day to them, and we've never had a problem that way. But make sure you don't build your fire too big, that you can't control it. Always make sure that you have a hose with some water and everything to control it if it gets out of control. And also at the very end, always make sure your fire is completely out before you leave the area. Don't leave any embers burning completely. I always tell our volunteers and staff that are helping with the bonfires, always water it about 10 minutes longer than you think it's done. So just make sure when water comes running out of the bottom, between the rocks of your rock fire, then you kind of have a good idea that it's out. But yeah, anything else? Anybody wants to add to that?
And so Andrew's mic's out, and he has another question, which is it good to put biochar in with redworms?
Yeah, it won't offer any benefits to the redworms. They can't really eat the biochar. It doesn't have anything edible for them, so they really won't do much with it. It won't hurt them in any way if you mix them. I do know that there are some people who like to take their biochar and then soak it in a compost tea to kind of inoculate it then with some of those microbes, and then take that and add that to their fields before applying their biochar.
Thank you, Rachel. And Gerard Kuhn, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, I was wondering if the low-tech biochar methods that you're going to be talking about can be used to make like a certified biochar, because I'm just starting to learn about this, but I understand there's going to be, or there already are, some sort of certification organizations or standards that official biochar needs to meet.
So right now in New Mexico, you do have to submit your technique and the materials that you're using to make your biochar. And you register with the New Mexico Department of Agriculture and to get a biochar license. And so you also need to show them what you would put on your labels, things like that. And then they approve of that. And then you get your license and you can sell biochar in the state of New Mexico.
Okay, but they never inspect the biochar itself that you're making?
They have that option that they can come out and do an inspection of your facility at any time and audit and all that kind of stuff to make sure that you're making it with what you say you're making it with, making sure, mostly to make sure there's no trash and things like that being included in that could be toxic.
Okay.
Burnt plastics and things like that can cause all kinds of problems.
Mm-hmm. I have a quick.
That's where.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah, we have like a area where they have free mulch and things like that for folks within the city of Las Cruces. And a lot of people have asked me, can I take that mulch and use that for biochar? And because of the risk of contamination with trash like plastics and things like that, I recommend that you don't, that you make sure that you collect things and make sure your materials are clean and don't have anything noxious like that in there.
Okay. Yeah, I had a quick related question, if you don't mind. I'm just kind of imagining that if one started to become a biochar producer on some sort of a regular basis and started selling it, wouldn't you need to coordinate your plant or your company or something with like the air pollution control district?
It's not required. I guess if you're doing it outdoors, it's not really. There's no regulations with that right now in New Mexico. I don't know if that will come around in the future, but at the moment, there's no regulations there. And so people have asked me, because the process of actually making biochar, that combustion does release CO2 and other things into the air, is that green? Is that environmentally responsible? And the thought is that the long-term benefits of the biochar, by adding that to your soil, you're going to help increase plant production. And by increasing the plant production, they can pull more of the CO2 and those sorts of things out of the air to help clean the air. So the long-term benefit of using biochar in your soil outweighs the momentary of when you do that immediate combustion to produce the biochar. Now, there are some equipment, if you want to go higher tech, there's like these European stoves that actually will burn your biochar, but then it also burns the off gases that are produced by your biochar, which then effectively has a much, much lower pollution rate. So you could reduce it that way.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
But I would recommend biochar. Oh, so go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Rachel.
Oh, I was just going to say, biochar is a wonderful value added thing that almost any farm can do. And right now, in the state of New Mexico, the whole cannabis business is really taking off. And a lot of people who grow cannabis use a lot of biochar. In fact, there are some hydroponic operations that are growing plants just in biochar instead of those pea pebbles and the clay pebbles and things like that are often used because they can actually, as the water's going through, sequester some of those nutrients in those pores and cause the positive bacteria to start growing in the hydroponic system. So I think this would be a great side business for almost any farm to be able to do. If you can get your license for that, you can sell it at farmers markets and anywhere else. And I think there's a great demand, especially at the moment. And as more hydroponics become more popular and certainly the cannabis industry continues to grow, this might be a great value added for any small farm to do.
Thank you, Rachel. And we have a question from Bob Besold. If you want to unmute yourself.
So is what's left over in my wood stove after I have a fire, there's charcoal bits, black bits. Is that biochar?
Yeah, that's going to be your biochar, those black bits.
Okay, good.
So any of the white powder stuff has gone too far and that becomes soot. And then it doesn't hurt your soil in any way, but it doesn't have those benefits of the water controlling and water absorption that the actual biochar does.
Oh, okay, great. So digging that into the soil is going to do it. Oh, fantastic. Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And Scott
And
Bennett.
I feel like this is one of these things. Oh, go ahead.
No, I'm going too fast. Sorry about that, Rachel. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think this is one of those that we're rediscovering an old technique. that my grandparents used to do that all the time and make biochar and add that to their gardens. Of course, they didn't call it biochar. They didn't have any fancy terminology for it, but it was something that a tradition that they'd been doing for a long time and taught me when I was little. And it's just funny to see, okay, now it's coming back into fashion again, now that we have the science behind it and what it actually does.
Yeah, I hear you there. And Scott Bennett, if you'd like to unmute yourself.
I'm wondering how long it lasts in the soil. Does it eventually break down? And
It will,
and
yeah.
how much can you add?
So the research right now says that between 5 and 10%, so basically a light sprinkling on the top of the soil, is the most effective. If you go beyond 10%, it doesn't hurt your soil in any way, but it doesn't provide any additional water saving sorts of benefits. And anything less than 5%, you don't see as much water saving. So that somewhere between 5 and 10%, according to the research studies, is the ideal range for biochar. And for me, I just add it every time I add compost and, basically between crops, we clear out a bed from one crop and then we amend it, and I just add that in each time. And as much biochar as we have at the time is what I add. That's kind of the limiting factor is how much we have available. And it gets worked into the soil and helps to aerate it a little bit better for some of that really thick clay soil. And I feel like it's hard to produce too much biochar for New Mexico, at least, New Mexico soils. It's going to be harder to make enough to overload it.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Well, that's great detail. Thank you for that. I'm kind of curious on more of the, you're preparing it. So I'm taking my black chunks out of my wood stove and I pulverize it so it's dusty, and then I hand sprinkle it over the area. Is that kind of your actual technique?
That's basically what we do. Yeah, you do it kind of outdoor in like a fire pit, and then we make piles of it, and then when we're ready to amend it to the soil, we kind of smash it a little bit with a shovel to make sure some of it is broken down. You don't necessarily need it powder thin. Chunks are okay. It just kind of depends on your garden system. Depending on how you manage it, your equipment going through, if bigger chunks get in clog, some of your rototillers or things like that you might be using, you might want to adjust the size of it for that. But the size really doesn't matter as much once it's worked into the soil. It will break down to the right size once it's in there.
Nice. You answered 2 questions in that one. Brian Nofton, would you like to unmute yourself?
Yeah, thanks. I'm just wondering if there's any soil types that do not benefit from biochar additions.
Goodness, yeah, so far, every paper I've read, it seems to help with every type of soil. And then, like I said, in the hydroponics, some people are growing it just in pure biochar and nothing else. So I think biochar is definitely a great media.
That's awesome, Rachel. You are great with this theme. It looks like you've answered everybody's questions. We do have a comment that I wanted to go back to. Let's see. Oh, that biochar is net zero because of all the CO2 the plants sequester while alive, from what Andrew Schwab has read. Oh, and we did have a last minute question. So Scott Bennett, if you'd like to mute yourself, feel free.
Yeah, one more. I'm wondering if it's mostly carbon that biochar is made of, I'm assuming.
Yes,
and then whatever microbes and stuff you can get to grow in it. But the carbon to nitrogen balance is important, I know, in growing. do you need to keep that in mind, or just treat your, or anything else need to be added, or do you just keep treating your soil the same way you always have?
Yeah, definitely. I wouldn't, so biochar isn't a nutrient. So I don't know that the carbon is in a form that the plants can actually access and use. So that's why you really have to rely on your compost to be your nutrition part of it. That the biochar really just creates that environment, that moist environment that benefits the microbes. It doesn't really release a whole lot of nutrition. So it shouldn't really affect your carbon nitrogen balance in terms of nutrition. So that's where it always seems to go hand in hand. We use it with our compost. When we add compost, we add our biochar.
So it's
the two
pretty
always
inert.
go together.
So it's pretty inert.
Yes,
once it's-
exactly.
Yeah. Good. Well, that's great. Thank
Yeah. But like I said, some people will soak their biochar in a compost tea. So that way you can kind of impregnate it with some of that, some of the beneficial microbes and things. And I'm sure it picks up some of the nutrition, you know, that gets absorbed into those pores, and then get wicked back out into the soil. But it's not the biochar itself that's providing that food. That in that case, it's the compost tea. You've just applied it in a different manner than spraying it on your soil.
Thank you. And Carl, I see you have your hand up. If you want to go ahead and mute yourself.
Sure. So I'm a, I guess, certified tree farm, 40 acres of ponderosa forest, and I've been over 30 years, burned a lot of slash piles over the years, and I now chip most of my slash. But one of the concerns I have about the slash pile burning, where you keep adding new material on top of the pile and smothering the flames, is that produces a lot of smoke. And
It does.
the discussions I've had with foresters about burning slash piles to biochar, they suggest constructing a fairly large pile and then top lighting it from the top of the pile. So you get a crown of flames at the top, and as the wood heats up from below and the smoke comes up through those flames, it burns off a lot of what would be the pollution that your neighbors would be really unhappy about, and as well as maybe the atmosphere. So that's one of the suggestions from people who burn slash a lot. You know, I mean, I don't think we need more carbon in the atmosphere, right? Anyway,
Right.
that's one of the things about burning biochar, making biochar in the barrel that I've been doing recently, is I'm amazed how little smoke it produces, because the flames come around the inside of the barrel and kind of cover over the top of the wood as it's burning. So the smoke gets burned off. Pretty cool system. Small, but very cool. Anyway, you'll see that tomorrow if you come to the field day. You can compare the two methods, see what works.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like a really neat idea. Thanks for bringing that up. There's a technique that they use in Europe a lot too, where they will actually dig a hole in the soil and dig these holes, and then they put their biomass in there. They light it, and then they cover it over with dirt, and it cooks in the absence of oxygen under there. I've never used that technique myself, so I can't really tell you how effective it is, but the people who use it love it, and one of the things that they mention is that there's no smoke with it then. So that might be something worth trying out and compare.
Nice. And we do have another question from Diane Pratt. If you'd like to unmute yourself.
So my understanding about biochar is that it's more alkaline. So with our alkaline soils, have you done any pH testing in your soils? And
The
secondly,
effects of,
I thought that the pyrolysis makes char, and it's adding the microbes that makes it biochar. Is that correct?
so the actual char, it's called biochar, even without the microbes. But sometimes they'll call it charged biochar or impregnated biochar. You know, I've heard bunches and bunches of terms. So it's, you know, it's such a new field right now that I think they're coming up with all kinds of new terms.
Okay. What about
And
the
then-
alkalinity?
And then I'm sorry. Yeah, it doesn't really affect biochar itself doesn't affect the pH of the soil in any way. I know there's been some people who try to use it to amend pH in soil, and I don't know of any research that shows that it's very effective at that at all. So I don't know that it releases anything into the soil to alter, to make it more acidic or alkaline. Yeah, I'm not aware of any research that shows that.
Excellent. Thank you.
And then I'm going to read Andrew's question. And I know that Andrew from Valencia County had his hand up. So I'm going to read this question. It says, does biochar increase the organic matter in soil? Is this the main point?
So it increases in terms, you're adding some carbon, but it's not really a form of carbon that's going to directly benefit your plants. It's more that it just is creating that beneficial environment for your soil microbes to do their job. Now, if you add the regular pure raw biomass, you know, wood chips or, you know, grass clippings and things like that directly into your soil, that definitely increases it in a way because that can break down and release its nutrients back into the soil.
Great. And Andrew, if you did have a question, if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Sure. Thank you for all that. That's super interesting information. I mean, I'm trying that the question about the organic matter wasn't this, Andrew, but I like the question because that's really, it was helpful to hear that that's really, it's a byproduct of, right? The increase in the organic matter is because you've set the physical setting such that you're attracting a microbial community that then is ready to do the work to increase the soil's organic material, assuming, like you say, that you're providing that raw material through compost, wood chips, what have you. So, I mean, I just can't, not as much a question, but just a quick comment, which is, we're down at Whitfield Wildlife Conservation Area, and we have a Johnson Sioux bioreactor, and now I want to build a biochar next to it, and then I want to be able to you know, have this series of different. We want to have a solar dehydrator next to that, and you know, I just have this vision of having 5 or 6 different on-hand demos of this technology that is DIY-able, right? That's the beauty of it. You can take it into your backyard, whether you're just interested in kind of landscape scale work or to your small, medium-sized farm, and really make a big difference. So I really love the connectivity that's been expressed by the speaker today. So I appreciate that.
Well, thank you.
Great questions, great information. I'm going to open it up to anyone else who might have some questions. Feel free to unmute yourself. Otherwise, there are some great links in the chat. So take a look at that. There's a survey and publication from NMSU that has been posted in the chat. So feel free to go through that and click on those links. I'll give it another second, see if there's any more questions.
Yeah, I do.
Oh, nice.
So back to my wood stove. So when I pull out my ash, should I strain out the fine ash from the charcoal before I add that to the soil? Or can I put all of it in there?
You know, I have added it all just out of laziness, because sorting out the little bits and pieces is just not too much work. It doesn't really, the ash doesn't provide any real benefit to the soil.
Okay.
But my understanding, you know, as long as you're just burning wood, it won't hurt it either.
Okay. And also, do you ever dig in the biochar, or you're just putting it right on the surface and then planting through it?
Yeah, we're kind of lazy, so we just add it to the surface with our compost, and it gets worked in. But every time we switch crops, you know, and rotate, we do rototill the surface of it. So it does get worked in that respect, but not at the time we first apply it.
Okay, good, thank you.
Sure. And you can definitely work it in. That's just our system, how we apply it. You could definitely work it in, put it in, and then work it into your soil. Especially if you feel like you need a good couple inches of it. If you have long rooted plants that you're trying to grow crops, then you might want to till it in and work it in to get it down through all the layers, so it'll be a couple inches deep.
Carl, did you want to say your comment about the compost?
Sure. One of the things I've gotten into this cool thing of when I make my biochar under our chickens, under their roosting poles, I put wood chips for all winter, but I add my biochar into those wood chips. And so all winter long, the chickens are fertilizing that. In the spring, I haul that whole mess out with the wood chips, the pine needles, the biochar, and put it in my compost pile. But as I'm doing that, building up my lasagna of compost pile with all different kinds of organic materials for biodiversity, I sprinkle in some garden sulfur, because our soils to begin with are very alkaline. And so, you know, if I can make my compost at least neutral, that's helpful. If I can make it more acidic, it's actually helpful too. But I have heard, and I don't know if it's true or not, I have heard that adding biochar does add alkalinity to the soil, which kind of stands to reason, actually. And I don't have the research or data. I can't point to anything. But anyway, that's what I've been doing. And also, don't forget to piss on your compost pile. Everything likes it. What can I say?
It's true. It's true. People mind it. It's good. That's great. So once again, I want to open it up and see if anybody has any last minute questions. I think Rachel did an amazing job at answering all the questions and some. Okay, I think.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to look into, I'm going to talk to some of the other professors and see about that alkalinity, if it's just a slight amount or if it's substantial. I mean, I haven't read anything, but it does make me curious. And like you said, it does stand to reason that it could. So I will look into that a little more and get back to you on that.
And we have a comment from Andrew's iPhone. He said, great session, learned a lot. Thanks, Rachel. I just want to let you know you're getting lots of kudos in the chat.
Oh, thank you. If you guys are ever down by the Las Cruces way and want to see our urban farm and where we make our biochar, we have a community garden there near Las Cruces High School, and we give demonstrations and workshops and invite the public to come out and learn.
Great. And I do have a few last minute announcements as well. So the Healthy Soil Program grant application opens March 18th. So go to NMDA's website to learn more. And you can now donate your state tax refund to NMDA for the Healthy Soil Program. So please be sure to ask your accountants about that. Biochar Field Day, of course, low-tech methods to create biochar tomorrow at 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. And this is going to include lunch at this magnificent place that I'm already at, the Chili Line Depot, located in Tres Piedras, the northeast corner of the major intersection. Amy, did you want to unmute yourself before we jump off? I see your hands up.
Just a super quick question. I know we've gotten some weather or snow, and I'm hoping to make it up there. Just wanted to know what the driving. Is there something that we should be?
If you're coming up from the south, so if you're going through the 285 and
Yep.
and going through Ojo Caliente and making left where Mesa Vista is,
Yep.
and right in La Madera, you should be
Yep.
good. It's all paved road.
Okay.
And then on the it's going to be on the 519, and you shouldn't hit the dirt road. If you do, you've gone 5 miles too far.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Looking forward to it.
Anyone coming up from the north is welcome to go down to that intersection where the 285 meets the 111, where Mesa Vista High School is. And otherwise, I just drove down the Forest Road, and it's a little muddy, but it's pretty solid soil. There is snow down that route, but for those of you who have 4-wheel drive and you take it easy and don't try to be speed racer, you should be okay.
Thanks for a wonderful presentation. That was awesome. Really enjoyed it.
Yes, thank you, Rachel.
Oh, thank you all for coming. You've made it great.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Of course.
All right.
Buenas noches, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Have a good evening.
Vaya con Dios.
Bye.
Vaya con Dios.